I'm delighted to introduce Sarah Legge, who is leading this session. Sarah's on the steering committee for EPIC and has been chairing the task group for the air quality and climate change guidance. Sarah's worked in both public sector and in consultancy and is currently an associate director of the air quality team at Arup. She works on air quality policy, strategy in cities, and crucially for this session, the intersection of air pollution and climate. Sarah was previously chair of the Air Quality Committee of Environmental Protection UK, and so brings a wealth of experience to EPIC on air pollution and the environment. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm going to be telling you today and officially launching the EPIC Air Quality, Integrating Action on Air Quality and Climate Change Guidance, a guide for local authorities. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that today. And let me share my screen. Great. So I'm hoping you are all seeing a slide deck there and you're hearing me fine.
Yeah, all good, Sarah.
Great. Fantastic. Great. So yes, very proud to be here. It's been a really great journey, albeit a long one, to launch this guidance. So very excited to do this as one of EPIC's first major guidance launches. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the guidance, why we've been launching this, why we've been developing and launching this guidance today, what's in it, how to use it, what the next steps are going to be, and then we've got some great reactions on both air quality and climate change sides in terms of kind of their reaction to the guidance, and then we're going to make sure we've got time for questions and answers, and we've got quite a few discussion points we'd like to put to you as the audience and the hopeful future users and promoters of this guidance. So why we created this guidance? This is actually an update of 2013 guidance that Environmental Protection UK put out. But the reason we created that guidance and the reason we've updated it now and feel it's still a really important kind of resource for local authorities and others is because of the reasons behind it. And that's because air quality and climate change both pose a massive threat to human health. They're very closely linked with common pollutants. So, for example, black carbon and ozone, which are commonly seen as local air pollutants, also act on the climate. Climate change is making air pollution worse, and possibly most pertinent for this local authority action, they all have a lot of common sources. So a lot of the interventions will be common to them or have the potential to be common to them. I think the World Health Organization has said that climate change is the biggest threat to humanity, and also that air pollution causes 1 in 8 deaths. So these are major environmental issues that we're looking at. Coming back to kind of why local authorities have a statutory duty to review and act on air quality, but many of them also declared a climate emergency. And those two processes aren't always integrated. And when they're isolated and coming from different departments with no linkages, you risk having unintended consequences and you lose opportunities to gain benefits and optimize for both issues. Integration can make action more effective. It's more cost effective to gain the benefits in both air quality and climate change. And it's also cheaper if you don't have to go back and fix the problem that you caused because you looked at something too siloed. It can also increase motivation and support. So, for example, some people are motivated by air pollution issues. A lot of us have friends and relatives who are directly impacted by the health impacts of air pollution. And some people are motivated by climate change and the threat that poses to all of us. So actually, by integrating this action, you double the motivation for many of these things. Also, you can optimize benefits and manage trade-offs. So, for example, if you're looking at kind of a retrofitting, well, hold on, let me save the examples because we've got a guidance full of them. There are many ways we can optimize benefits. by integrating this action. And it does mean we avoid some of those unintended consequences. And also it helps to focus measures where and when they have the most impact. So, for example, if you've got a climate measure that has an air quality benefit, put it in a place where the air pollution is worse, and you'll get extra benefits for no additional cost. And also when they have the most impact, a lot of the work we're doing on climate is kind of long term, but the air quality benefits will be felt here and now. And so that can both feed back into the effectiveness of the measures and also kind of the motivation and that storytelling element to kind of engage people in it. So this guidance is designed to support local authorities understand the issues and the crossovers and the intersections and actually integrate action on key measures. There has been a number of other guidances looking at air quality and climate change. Most of those are kind of top down. This is very much bottom up. So it's aimed to give practical support to officers in kind of air quality, environmental health, sustainability, climate change, energy officer departments, but also transport and planning and strategic planning and all the things that kind of are related to the measures on that. It also provides quite a lot of information for decision makers and others. So, as I mentioned before, this is an update of the 2013 EP UK Air Quality and Climate Change Guidance for local authorities. And we've had, we started updating this just before EP UK merged with the IES and became EPIC. And since then, we've had a task group working on that, and also kind of external contributors and reviewers that we've roped in. So there's a lot of expertise on a wide range of issues and from a wide range of different organisations involved in this. Many of you will know we launched the exposure draft in February, and that's been that got a lot of really interesting responses, some very detailed responses for which we're very grateful. And also we held a focus group with a lot of local authority offices to kind of have a more detailed discussion. Following that, we've actually added in several additional measures and kind of refined it. So hopefully it will be as useful as possible. So in terms of what's in the guidance, there's an executive summary, which is kind of particularly useful for people who like to look at things to understand what's available, but not in too much detail. So that will hopefully be an influential part for that. And then we give an introduction, look at air quality and climate change and local authorities. So it's like what the impacts are, why do these matter to local authorities, where the interactions are. So we've outlined some of the science as well, and some of the benefits to integrating action. And then there's a section on taking an integrated approach, which looks at the importance of interactions with elected members, developing air quality and climate change officer relationships, identifying where there's overlap in the work of the local authority, looking at environmental justice as a specific issue, and also then looking at how air quality and climate change then interact with other environmental issues. And so that's been, that will hopefully give you a really good understanding of what the issues are and some tools to start looking at that. And then there's 22 measures that local authorities can take on air quality and climate change, on transport, building and the built environment and overarching, and some appendices on, there's a background to air quality, a background to climate change, and one looking at the air quality impacts of net zero. So hopefully comprehensive and useful for what you're doing. I'm just going to talk for a moment about the measures themselves. So this is an example of a measure. It's actually one of the shorter ones, which is why I've picked it for this, because the other ones do stray into slightly more detail. This one looks at energy efficiency and the role that energy efficiency can play in both air pollution and climate. And you can see there will be an introductory section, and then we look at the impact, the air quality impacts, both on hotspots, so where you've got kind of a specific issue, a local issue that you want to address, but also on emissions. So that looks at kind of the wider impacts. And then we also have a climate rating as well. And we've used basically an extended RAG system. And you will then see underneath there's further detail, and we look at other impacts. So we look at kind of the impact on heat, on the local economy. There's a particular issue here around indoor air quality and the misuse of air tightness that's given it a minor negative rating. Now, I thought it would just be useful to explain that the impact ratings assume that local authorities are delivering an ambitious version of this measure. And ambitious here, we mean kind of either, it's about geographical scale or the depth of the measure. Considering constraints and funding and powers, but without the mitigation of negative impacts. So it's basically an ambitious measure, but it's a realistic one. So we're not saying everybody can do everything, because that's not going to be feasible in the real world. But we are assuming an ambitious level. The reason we've gone with the RAG rating is because the level of ambition has so much impact on the scale of the benefits that you get, and this so it wasn't possible to say an exact number. We thought this would be the most useful, and it's also useful to note that there's no mitigation. So negative impacts are assuming that we put no mitigation in, whereas actually a lot of these measures, if mitigated, would actually end up being neutral or certainly not negative anymore. And so I think it's to identify the risk, but it's not to say that's necessarily a showstopper. It just needs mitigation. So other measures have further information. We've got a lot of links in there, and we've also got additional information for you to kind of find out more on what local authorities have done already. And then there's a summary table. This is actually only part one of it, but it brings together all the measures looking at kind of the impact on air quality hotspots, air pollution emissions, climate emissions, and also flags up some of the other emissions. And this is an executive summary. Just to give you, we don't have time to go through the whole thing. This is the list of all the measures that we've looked at. So it splits them into themes. We've got transport measures around public transport, shared transport and active travels, vehicle control measures, and measures for reducing emissions from different vehicle types. We've got emissions measures on the built environment, including buildings, the public realm, and energy and heat. And that's got some of the more detailed things around kind of energy efficiency, wood burning, and so on. And then we've got a couple of overarching measures as well in terms of waste and sustainable procurement, which didn't fit into either transport or built environment because they really fall into both. And in addition to that, we've also identified some top measures. So depending on what your priority are, you can kind of come to this list and identify quite quickly some places to start the discussion about kind of what's the most impactful for both, or for air quality or for climate change. And then you can kind of go off and have a look at each measure and say, well, this is what our priorities are, and therefore this is a way we could look at it. And we've also looked at kind of spotlights on low-cost measures and measures for schools, which are of particular interest. The guidance also has a lot of case studies throughout the report. Many of them actually are built on data from the Air Quality Hub. So that's really useful, and really, we're very grateful to them for sharing those. So actually under specific ones, this is one from the taxi measure, has an example of a scheme that's already been put in place, and we've got kind of case studies dotted throughout, so hopefully you can learn from real world experience. So in terms of the next steps, we're really pleased to be launching the guidance today at the EPIC conference. It's available on the IAS website, and it is going on the Air Quality Hub as well. And I've put the website in there, but I think Ellie has already dropped it into the chat. So that's fantastic. There will be further promotion on social media through newsletters, communities and networks. So I'm hoping that actually you will see it through lots of different places. Not too much duplication for your sake, but we're really trying to promote it to get it out to the people who can use it. So would like to thank you for using this guidance, for sharing this guidance with colleagues. If you're an air quality specialist at a local authority, please share it with your climate colleagues. Please share it with your transport and strategic planning colleagues. Please share it with your elected members. And if you're a climate person, please share it with your air quality people. I know we've got people here from kind of public health, environmental health, all sorts of different elements, so of local authorities and others. So we've got quite a lot of consultancies, including myself, who will be kind of sharing this as well. So yeah, really like to encourage you to do that, and really grateful for your efforts doing so. We are already planning a feedback meeting next autumn to discuss the guidance and its use. We want to make sure that this is as effective and useful as it can possibly be. So obviously the consultation was part of that, but we are already kind of planning to do a feedback meeting on that. So really appreciate your thoughts. If you've got any more questions or any thoughts about it earlier than that, please do contact us. I've actually put Ellie's address in there, so please do contact Ellie in the first instance, and that would be fantastic. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Isaac and Don to give a little bit of reaction from both the climate change and air quality perspective. But just before I do that, I wanted to kind of throw a few questions at you. After they've had a moment to speak, we're going to take some Q&A for all three of us. And then I've got some specific questions that I'd like to do. And I think when we get to that stage, Ellie's going to pop them in the chat for you. One is, how do you see yourself using this guidance? A second is, how do we get it to the right people? And the third is, what more is needed to integrate action on air quality and climate change? So they're kind of the three questions I'd like you to bear in mind, and we'll come back to those in the question and answer discussion sessions. And just before I hand over to my reactors, I just would like to acknowledge the immense amount of effort that the EPIC task group has put into pulling together this guidance, particularly our technical editor, Alaric, who has done an amazing job bringing it all together when we had so many different people contributing to make it a concise and coherent document. Really appreciate that. So I'd just like to kind of thank all the task group members who are listed here. And I would also like to thank all our contributors and reviewers, the local authorities who gave us permission to use those case studies, and the Air Quality Hub. I'm not going to read this list out, it's even longer than the previous one. But I did want to kind of just say thank you so much, and we'd really like to thank you all for using and sharing this guidance. So I'm going to stop there. And I would like to hand over to our reactors. And then we'll come back for kind of Q&A and discussion. So I think Isaac is going to speak first. Isaac Beaver, who's the Partnership Director at Climate Emergency UK. I think Isaac's been working on local climate policy for a long time. I think he started in Vancouver and then moved over to kind of the UK and climate emergency about 3.5 years ago. Climate Emergency UK, for those of you who don't know, works with councils, residents and others on climate action, on council climate action. So Isaac's been actually overseeing the creation of climate action plan checklists, the council climate plan scorecards, and then the action scorecards, which are the only UK-wide assessments of council climate plans and now climate action. So Isaac, if I can hand over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, people, when I say start off in Vancouver, people get slightly disappointed they're not about to hear a Canadian accent. But yeah, I am British and I was in Vancouver in Canada when I started working in this field. And yeah, thanks Sarah, and thanks Ellie as well for the invite, and to EPIC obviously, or EPIC, sorry, what a great acronym, for producing this report. It's obviously really useful. It contains, as Sarah said, all that useful guidance, but putting it together to show, you know, which policies are both really impactful on air quality and on climate is great, because it just highlights like where local authorities and councils can have the biggest impact. It obviously reaffirms that climate and tackling air pollution should be done together, and why. It's well understood that co-benefits of climate action mean more to the public. People understand the co-benefits of climate action more. It feels more real. It's more tangible than reducing emissions. If you can point to an improvement in air quality, as Sarah said, is something that happens now. And so the way a lot of climate action and policy has been sold, I guess, or encouraged or communicated, is through the co-benefits of what they actually produce. And one of those main co-benefits is obviously air quality. And as has been shown, the report contains a fantastic list of initiatives and case studies and actions that councils can take to both tackle climate emergency and obviously improve on air quality. And I'm really glad that it includes more than transport as well, because often air quality and climate, when they're put together, it's just like, oh, what can we do to decarbonise transport and improve air quality? But actually buildings and the built environment are a huge part of that. And just to, you know, highlight one or a couple of things, the Mayor of London and TfL, one of them, have new electric buses that are going through. They're targeting those in some of the areas with the worst air quality. So I know some of the newest London buses, electric buses, are coming down near me in Peckham, which is great. And it's an exact example of this happening in real life. But I'm also really thankful that the report mentions parking controls, because I think it's one of the most underutilised powers that councils have to support transport decarbonisation, but to also support and improve on air quality as well. So yeah, it's really fantastic that parking controls has a dedicated page to it, and all those initiatives listed there as well, including things like Waltham Forest parklet process, removing parking in new development. Also shout out to things like Lewisham's emissions-based parking, which charges for vehicles that produce higher emissions. Things like that councils have full control over. I think, as I said, it's one of the most underutilised areas, and councils need to take more and greater action around parking to both tackle the climate crisis, but also to improve air quality as well. And I think obviously the challenge around that, as well as the resources and funding that local authorities are facing, is that air quality action can be really targeted, AQMAs and the management areas, whereas climate action is often seen as broader. It's something they're trying to do across the district. And that's one of the key differences, where air quality teams might be like, no, we have to work on this particular junction because that's where AQMA is. But actually climate action has a much broader impact. And so trying to find those areas where you can introduce the policies where it has the most impact for both, as Sarah pointed out, means that you just produce so many more co-benefits for free effectively. And in terms of what we can do in terms of support, obviously resources like these and reports like these are really important, because it provides that guidance. It helps local authorities with evidence and best practice as well. And we do that a bit at Climate Emergency UK through the council climate scorecards. But we're also pushing for the fact that we think that there should be a fully funded statutory duty for climate as well, as there obviously is a statutory duty on air quality, but we think that there should be one on climate as well. But one of the other things that I think that we can all do, and we should all focus on, is that councils, when they try to introduce these initiatives, often face a backlash. Often change can be controversial. If we look at what happened in Wales with the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, or in London with the ULEZ. And actually, when councils and political leaders stick their heads above the parapets to take these actions, we sometimes need to be there alongside them, pointing out why they're doing this, what the impact of this will be. It's sometimes really easy to be in rooms like this amongst people that are supportive and talking to each other and talking to this, but we actually need to be out there and be advocates, because when politicians do take these actions, they will be controversial at times. And we need to be there alongside them, showing them that it is still worth it. It is still making the case in the public, you know, being out in the media, being out in the newspapers. So it's not just something that where we publish case studies and really good reports that are really useful, but actually something that turns into action in real life as well, because that's where it's obviously going to make the difference. So yeah, I think that was one of the things that I wanted to reflect on, that these reports are great, these resources are great, but we also need to be there when the going gets tough, when local authorities try to introduce some of the best practice that these reports include. Thank you for having me to speak and give a bit of reaction. Yeah, I'll pass back to Sarah to go on forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Isaac. That's really helpful, and great to hear his perspective, because I'm an air quality specialist, albeit one that works on the intersection of air quality and climate change. But yeah, people who are come from the climate side, you know, have a very different perspective on this, and we were really keen to make sure it was helpful to both sides of the integration, as it were. So I'm gonna as I did for me, I'm going to hold any questions for Isaac till after we finished the presentations. So if you've got any thoughts for Isaac, please do hold them onto them. I'm actually now going to turn to Dr. Donald Payne, who Don's actually been a member of the task group, but was invited to join that to give really useful feedback from kind of his work at the coalface at Fife Council. So Don's a geologist by training, but studied climate change in South America and worked in digital cartography in South India before joining the land and air quality team at Fife Council. So both working on the coalface, but also across a range of different things, great for an integrated problem such as this. So Don works on strategic land inspections, but actually also a lot of public health duties, including local air quality management, working on active travel networks, and also kind of energy security and district heating. So I'm going to hand it over to Don to give us a reaction from a local authority air quality perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Isaac, too. Obviously, as a council, we have a duty to monitor local air quality and to reduce pollution where possible. That's my role. It's a rare thing to overhear the council praised in the street. That has actually happened to me, where we had made interventions in traffic management to try to reduce air pollution, which also at the same time had the effect of reducing congestion, and therefore people were actually quite pleased about the work that we'd done. Like I say, it doesn't happen too often. Some things are obviously beyond our immediate control, although we can try to influence them. I'm thinking about things like vehicle emission standards, you know, the Euro engine standards, or transboundary particle pollution. My primary role in the council is to protect public health, and we have at the same time separately declared a climate emergency, as have many other councils. And so it's always in the back of our minds that our actions could and should be targeted at mitigating both air pollution and gas emissions. And I feel this new guidance will help to focus our attention on the most suitable interventions. We in Fife commissioned some research a couple of years ago now on the subject of air quality and climate change co-benefits, based on the National Atmospheric Emissions Inventory and using a scenario modelling tool that was developed by DEFRA. We looked at 44 mitigation measures across 3 sectors that have already been mentioned: transport, buildings, and specifically waste management, where there are opportunities as well. So examples of the sorts of things we were looking at: insulating older houses, electrifying road vehicles, diverting biodegradable waste from landfill, but broken down into detailed interventions and specific mitigation measures. But we really struggled to find the figures we needed for our 2019 baseline. And there was also some uncertainty about the design of the model we were using. So our focus at the moment is really on identifying trends and looking at data gap analysis. So while that project we undertook, it hasn't quite stalled, but we find ourselves in a bit of a hiatus, waiting for data and guidance to catch up. And I think maybe that's happened now with this announcement today. Nonetheless, despite hitting some problems, our research project really has opened regular and frequent discussion between ourselves in air quality and my colleagues in the Council's Climate Change and Zero Waste team. And I think this is important because local elected members are always bemoaning the fact that council departments don't talk to each other. They do expect to receive unified answers from disparate offices. So I think anything that promotes closer working between teams is to be welcomed. I'm hopeful that this publication, being launched today from the Institution of Environmental Sciences, will prompt both a flurry of focused activity, but also a resurgence in long-term interest around the co-benefits of providing policy-based and practical air quality and climate change interventions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Don. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to open the floor now to questions. I think Ellie's been keeping an eye on the chat. And if you've got specific questions, do feel free to raise your hand and we can kind of unmute. If I know I posted kind of posed three questions earlier, which Ali's going to drop into the chat. So if they are addressing any of those three questions, that's great. Otherwise, I'm going to take general questions for maybe 5-10 minutes, and then we can kind of come back to those three questions. So, thank you, Ali. So if anyone wants to raise their hand, we can give those priority. Otherwise, Ali, do you want to?
Yeah, like Sarah said, I'll give priority to anyone who wants to raise their hand and unmute. But otherwise, I'll go through the questions in the chat. First of all, we've got a question from Christopher. Christopher, you can unmute and ask your question. Christopher, yeah, off you go. Oh, we can't seem to hear you. So, you know what? I'll ask your question for you. Sorry for putting you on the spot, Christopher. So Christopher asked, does the guidance encourage the use of air source heat pumps wherever appropriate? And if so, does it advise local authorities about the restrictions for their installation under planning permitted developments, which are under review by the new government regarding noise control?
Yeah. Thanks, Christopher. It does talk about the noise impacts of air source heat pumps. So under each measure, and you'll have seen a snippet of one earlier, it looks at kind of the air quality impacts, the climate impacts, but then it looks at other impacts before moving on to kind of supporting information. What can local authorities do, other issues and further information, and that's kind of consistent throughout. But the other impacts will vary between different measures. Under the where air source heat pumps are mentioned under non-combustion renewables, there is definitely a flag that says air source heat pumps can be noisy, and there's some concerns about the cumulative noise impacts of multiple air source heat pumps, especially in kind of where they're widely introduced in new large urban developments. So that's actually been given a negative rating for noise, but just letting you know, kind of that is unmitigated. You know, there are measures that can be taken to mitigate almost everything. So it is flagged up there, and actually I think that particular issue is also referenced in the introductory sections as an example of a negative impact on other environmental things. And sorry, what was the second part of the question about planning? Oh, you're
sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah. Does it advise local authorities about the restrictions for their installation under planning permitted developments, which are under review by the new government regarding noise control?
Yeah, I think that's probably a decision for the new government, because it's kind of an overarching one. I don't know if anyone here is able to speak to that one. We are trying to flag up these as issues so local authorities can kind of flag them to their planning departments, and this will hopefully kind of provide more support for that position, and to kind of flag up where there are some potential conflicts and trade-offs that need to be flagged up. So I don't know if anyone else wants to come back on the national government question, or comment on kind of planning and how we deal with some of these issues. Okay.
Christopher, has that answered your question? Thumbs up from Christopher. Great. And yeah, I'll ask actually, well, another question from Christopher, because the other question have been answered in the chat, but as a case study, does the guidance refer to some London boroughs who have built new social housing using ground source heat pumps, which are better than air source heat pumps for large developments? So another one from Christopher.
I'm not sure it refers to the London boroughs that have built that, but I know it does talk about ground source heat pumps, because it talks about heat pumps, so solar technologies and micro wind, as all things that local authorities might get involved in. And it does kind of flag or signpost you to kind of where you can get more information on all of those, as well as what local authorities can do within their powers. So yeah, I don't think it mentions the London example specifically, but we had to draw a line somewhere, I'm afraid, in terms of what we could fit into one guidance document.
Oh yeah, I mean, already over 100 pages, so yeah.
Yeah, hopefully easy to navigate, but great.
And Nick has also come back in terms of that first question, just to add that for planning consent, it's relatively easy. No, it's relatively easy to condition new developments to ensure ASHPs do not cause noise nuisance. So
yeah, thanks, Nick.
There's no more questions on the chat, so shall we go to the discussion questions?
That would be fantastic. So I think the first question we wanted to put to everybody was, how do you see yourself using this guidance? So obviously we've got a mixed audience here. So there was quite a lot of local authority members, but there's also kind of a lot of people like myself who advise local authorities, in my day job, as it were, when I'm not chairing this task group. And there's others who are kind of, just interested in the work the councils are doing, either as NGOs or communities or individuals. So how do you see yourself using this guidance was the first question. I don't know if anyone would like to come back on that one. Nick.
Really, Justin, to respond to Donald's comment, yes, councillors really do like joined up thinking between departments. And it's one of the things that I will be promoting this within my own local authority, not just for air quality work, but for transportation and the sustainability team as well, so that hopefully we'll have it all worked out in our strategies, which should complement each other. Cross fingers.
Thanks, Nick. And actually, I should be asking people to say where you're from. So Nick is also an air quality specialist at a council, so very much again at the coalface. So that's fantastic. Yeah, I think we recognise that some local authorities are very joined up, very collaborative. Some even have integrated strategies already or have strong connections between their air quality and their climate change strategies. But there are some local authorities where that isn't necessarily the case. There's even some local authorities, some because they're in different tiers of the air quality and the climate teams might even be in different tiers of authorities, and some where they are just in different departments with different champions and very much kind of doing their own thing. So there's quite a lot of really useful information in the guidance about kind of building those relationships and the importance of relationships both with elected members and also with kind of other officers within the local authority, that will hopefully be really useful in helping kind of an air quality specialist or a climate specialist or sustainability specialist to start making those linkages and building a really positive relationship towards kind of more effective action. Would anyone else like to kind of come in on this? I'm happy to also broaden it in terms of, I think the next question might prompt a few more discussions from outside kind of local authorities themselves, which is how do we get it to the right people? If you feel that this is a useful document, which I'm hoping you will, but you aren't necessarily a local authority member, or you're a local authority member but struggling to get kind of engagement, how do you think we can get this to the right people? Because that's going to be the next step to make sure this is kind of effectively used and effectively shared. Is going to be kind of our next priority. Jacob, would you like to come in on that one?
Yeah, speaking of air quality, I am aware that some countries may have a bit more difficulty with this, especially if they're like highly populated ones, like with examples like parts of America, for example. So no offense here, but I was just kind of wondering, that I heard that some countries are aiming for like net carbon zero emissions by around 2050, like the UK. So I was just wondering, if you got like really populated countries like US, for example, do you have any idea when they might be predicting to get air quality levels to a suitable level, or even go net carbon zero or something?
I'm not sure exactly what the US has committed to. I know that we have a commitment in this country to work towards net zero. And there's a lot of, this is kind of one of the reasons that we started on this, sorry, excuse me, but being dazzled by a sunbeam, which is very unusual at this point in the year. Sorry, what was I saying? Yeah, so we are working as a country towards net zero. And what that has meant is there's a lot of action, a lot of kind of pilot studies and demos and rollouts of pilot studies around climate change that have been, that are starting to really ramp up. And some of those take into account air quality, because there's also a lot of pressure on air quality at the moment. There's much more public awareness. So you've got organisations such as the Ella Kissy Deborah Foundation and Mums for Lungs, and a lot of the organisations in the Healthy Air Coalition that we're also part of, really pushing awareness of air pollution and health impacts. So there's a lot of pressure on both, but what we risk ending up having is large-scale measures looking at energy efficiency in buildings and retrofitting kind of existing buildings as well as kind of new developments. And if we can get air quality in there, we have an opportunity to make massive air quality benefits. But if we miss that opportunity and they go off on a purely net zero perspective, then we are not going to get those benefits, and we'll still be trying to figure out how to deal with air quality and health. And the scale of the opportunity that is facing us because of the transition in society at the moment, and the move towards net zero, and the move towards kind of health and well-being, really drove home how important this particular guidance was, and it's focused on the local authorities at the moment because they have a lot of the control over measures, with a caveat over making sure there's kind of the funding and the political support for that, in terms of driving things forward. So I see, and I think the task group saw this as kind of really part of that push towards net zero. This is the moment we need to be doing it. So I'm not sure exactly when the US are aiming for that, but this guidance is hopefully one of the parts that will be supporting that move. So, yeah. Is that Sean?
Hi, I believe that's Keith, but I think you've joined
Yeah.
Keith with Sean's link, so that's why we've
I
gone to
was
Sean.
going to say,
Yes,
you
Keith.
don't look much like a Sean to me, but do go ahead.
Is it the beard? A couple of things on distribution of the document. Probably the easiest is either through the local government association, or might be slightly harder work, but going to each individual either portfolio holder or lead councillor, depending on how local authorities are structured. The ones responsible for, it's normally climate and sustainability, but they'll be different. You'll find the right one, but it's going to take time to go through them. But the LGA would be a good starting point. The other thing was actually on the document itself, and as we were as a country are going to build to growth, the construction sector is something that has often been overlooked. And I'm not talking about the major developments where they have impact assessments done and mitigation measures in place, but the smaller sites that fall between the cracks. And they cumulatively, I think, have probably the largest effect in terms of the demolition phase, construction phase, handover phase, and ongoing use of those buildings. So I just wondered if the construction sector gets a mention in this document, or whether that's for a completely separate piece of work.
Yeah, no, thank you. We have actually already spoken to the LGA, and I'm hopeful that it's going out in their newsletter that's going out to chief executives tomorrow. So hopefully we'll pick that up there. But yes, you're absolutely right about the portfolio holders. Moving on to the construction specific point, there is a measure on construction in there. It's interesting because a lot of the work we do as air pollution specialists on construction is around dust, and that has limited climate impacts. So it's more of a nuisance issue. But we do talk about the opportunity for reducing both air quality and climate change impacts through the use of construction plant and generators, especially. And we've kind of got a few suggestions in terms of what local authorities can do on that and some of the impacts that will have. We've been working actually at Arup, along with Impact on Urban Health, developing a construction emissions toolkit that helps developers kind of manage their understand and manage their air quality and climate change emissions. And so that, for example, is flagged as one of the tools. There's also kind of some of the work that Merton has done around construction code of practice. And there's Climate Emergency UK's, oh, I see Isaac's got his hand up, so I might let him tell you about that. So we have dealt with construction. We've tried to focus on the areas and the issues and the measures and interventions where there is a crossover between air quality and climate change. So, for example, we don't go into dust in a great lot of detail because there are other resources that deal with that. Isaac, did you want to come in on
just
your work
just
around
one
that,
thing where
which
this thanks for that. Yeah, so good question. One of the things I actually attended a construction an engineering event just recently and was chatting to people involved in the construction industry and was talking about this a little bit. One of the things that councils are starting to introduce, and although they're maybe not applying it to small scale development, so it is a fair point that it needs to be rolled out as well. But what's been introduced in London and other areas like Bath and in places like coming through like Wiltshire and Reading is this idea of encouraging or forcing developers to and people involved in construction to measure and report on the life cycle emissions of that development. And what that does means is, all of the emissions created through transport of the materials themselves, but also the transport of materials. Also, like the generators on site or how it's powered, so the building site itself. And even just by getting developers and construction industry to actually report on those emissions has led the developers and construction industry to try and reduce those emissions. So it has led them to be like using more electric vans, like, which would improve air quality, like using different types of generators to power the site on the actual building site. And that's why, again, a really key thing that where climate and air quality can intersect. And so, by getting developers to calculate the emissions from the whole life cycle of creating that building, but also in terms of demolition as well, but also getting that applied to small scale development as well could have like a really big impact, because it just encourages developers who are already trying to go through planning committees, which can be controversial and hard for them. If they go, look, we're doing all this stuff to reduce our emissions, but it also improves local air quality, that makes like a massive difference. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that councils can do to help both improve air quality and reduce emissions from development as well.
Great, thank you. Oh yes, and there's quite a lot going on in the chat as well in terms of kind of suggestions of other things that are going on around construction, and also PM 2.5 and the GLA's air quality neutral policy. And I'm also seeing, actually, just to try and catch up with it, and Ellie, maybe you can give me a bit of a summary, some suggestions around kind of specific organisations. So the UK 100, I think we've spoken to, but I'm not sure we've reached out to the Association of Directors of Public Health, which could be a useful link for us. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, do keep them coming. We want to make sure we're reaching out, but we think we've tried to design it and tried to write it in a way that is going to be useful for a wide range of people with a wide range of kind of expertise coming at this issue from a lot of different points of view. So we're aware that we're not experts in every single one of those perspectives and approaches. So anything you can give us in terms of kind of who best to kind of reach out to, it would be fantastic. Ellie's just posted the last question, but James, I think you put up your hand just before that. Do you want to kind of come in and speak?
Yeah, just a general point, really. It was something we've been doing in Cornwall, because we've had diminishing resources in local authorities, but we've been working quite a lot with local bodies and schools and town and parish councils, and we had a DEFRA grant a couple of years ago to produce some materials for schools to use, which is kind of linked together with climate change messaging, and we've actually got some really good results out of that. So in one of our air quality management areas, we've managed to reduce about 41,000 miles worth of travel from school, just people going to schools in a particular town in Cornwall. And really, it was quite low key, really, because it's basically the schools have sort of taken it on as part of their curriculum activities, and the messaging's going out from the parents to children about the climate change, active travel, all that sort of stuff. And we've actually got sort of measurable results that actually for that project has, improved some of those car trips. So I think my message is really, if local authorities are struggling, maybe look to work with communities, voluntary groups, schools, town and parish councils, and they might want to take on the mantle, particularly with the climate agenda being quite popular amongst younger people. And they will run with a lot of projects and things like that will drive down emissions, and both carbon emissions and air quality emissions. So I just wanted to raise that point, really, if we're struggling for staff and stuff like that, really.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds like a really interesting example you've got for that. Have you got plans to kind of put that on the Air Quality Hub?
Yeah,
if it isn't already.
Yeah, we've got tools, an air quality toolkit, which is branded, which I think we've published on our Cornwall Council website, which anyone can access, and that's got sort of learning materials on there. So I'm quite happy to put that on the hub if that, I'm quite happy to send that to you if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean the hub is being organised by DEFRA now. It's just we've taken a lot of our examples from the hub, and I know local authorities use that as a real learning space.
Yeah,
we'll experience.
We'll send, I mean, DEFRA, I think, are sort of have had the materials as well, but obviously it would be good to put it on the hub. That'd be great.
Yeah, and great one for our next iteration, perhaps, Ellie, but don't plan to edit it immediately. That's fantastic. And I think also you touched on a really important point there as well about kind of local authority funding and resourcing, which I think a lot of local authorities struggle with a lot. And it is interesting, one thing we didn't really touch on, but I think is really pertinent, is that actually I do know of several local authorities who don't necessarily have the funding and the political support for air quality action, but when bundled with air quality and climate action, then are able to access some of those funds that are set aside for climate action. So it's actually, this will hopefully help local authorities in that situation kind of explain the need and the benefits for some of those kind of additional resources coming in to support sort of integrated action. So that's fantastic. Great. And then Ellie had posted the last question, which is what more is needed to integrate action on air quality and climate change. And I'm willing to take comments about what, if you think we should be doing less. But the theme very much for today is kind of what more can we do, either in terms of this guidance or in terms of kind of the bigger picture or work that you're doing yourselves. So.
Maybe this is a sign that the guidance is solving all the problems of integrating action on climate change, and nothing more needs to be done. No more action needs to be taken.
Other than put it into action. I can see Jacob and Derek both have their hands up. I'm actually going to go to Derek first, because Jacob's already spoken. Oh, and a few other people, but then I'll come back to you, Jacob, if that's okay. Derek.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So congratulations again, everybody, on the guidance which has come out looking splendid. And on this occasion, it has been extremely interesting bringing together local experience and the guidance. You've talked about how well local authorities manage to integrate between departments. We haven't said how poorly government sometimes manages to integrate between separate departments. And the follow-up that I think you already hinted at, and I would like to reinforce that you might get from this, is looking at all the separate topics you've identified. What would help most if government did to reinforce the possibility of those actions going forward? And conversely, where is government lack of integration between different policies and areas hindering local authorities from doing their best? And I wonder if EPIC is contemplating a follow-up study which would be looking at all that this local authority experiences have been drawn together. What would be the half-dozen greatest asks to government to make this whole area of activity move forward more effectively?
Sorry, I muted myself. Very good questions as always, Derek. Right to the nub of the thing. I'm actually going to see if either Don or Isaac would like to come back on any of the points kind of raised there, because and then I'll chip in with my 5 pence worth.
Yeah, so what can the government do to basically do more to integrate climate and air quality action, but also to support it? I think that I was just getting the gist of the question. I think that was I think one of the things they can do is set bolder air quality targets. I think that would encourage a lot of action. One of the things that is that our air quality targets, I'm probably might be using the wrong language, Sarah, so correct me if I'm wrong, but they're too high basically. They're far above the WHO guidance on what is like a safe, although there isn't safe, but what's a safer level of air pollution. And the fact that lots of our cities don't have low emission or clean air zones when they probably should, because if you are actually to reduce those targets, you would a lot of areas would have now illegal air pollution. Means that's one of the things the government could do, and that would create the momentum to tackle air quality and climate action together, because all those transport initiatives and built environment initiatives would be encouraged again because of the statutory duty and the legal duties around climate action. I think that's one of the key things that just to pull out one that the government could do to actually just have a whole new wave of air quality action come through. But of course, civil society still plays a role, because the government wouldn't have done anything on even though they're too high, the government would have done a thing on the air quality levels if they weren't sued, and they weren't forced to. The government was sued on those air quality levels because they weren't doing enough to do that, to take action on air quality. Because the government was sued, and then they then forced the worst performing local authorities on air quality to introduce clean air zones, which is why we saw a huge wave of clean air zones being introduced in Birmingham and other places, although Greater Manchester was an absolute debacle. But I think if you were to further reduce those limits, to actually set targets and then to reduce it, you know, over a period of time down to the World Health Organization's levels, then that would be one of the most impactful things that I think the government could do. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Don, did you want to?
Yeah, if I could just add to that. Yeah, the Scottish Government at present is revisiting the equality legislation, and we're involved in consultation on changes. And I could talk at great length about that, but it's not relevant to the whole conference. But one thing I wanted to make the point about is that you know, guidance, and excellent guidance though this is not legislation, and we often face a problem as regulators that we can't force people to follow guidance, even if it is best practice. You know, we can explain that they might, you know, a developer might face criticism if they don't follow the technical guidance, but they can just turn around and say, well, it's not law, so we don't have to, and we don't really have an answer to that. So, you know, sometimes having the primary legislation changed is difficult, but just to go back to the new WHO guidelines, they are really, you know, I think you're correct, Isaac, in saying that you know, we need to keep on tightening down the objectives for air quality, but in fact the WHO guideline for PM2.5 is really very strict, and we would be struggling even in a reasonably rural parts of our local authority area to meet those new guidelines. And we'd also be struggling to look for interventions we could make that would help with that. There being so many different sources of particulate pollution, and also the difficulty of measuring them. We don't have any confident means of separating out vehicle pollution from dust off the fields, from Saharan dust, from sea salt, and all of these from tire rubber. All these things contribute. And so, you know, hopefully the science will move forward on the source apportionment side. But in terms of actually meeting these new objectives, I think we've got a challenge on our hands.
Yeah. Thanks. That's really great. I've just realized what time it is, so I need to bring this to a close. If anyone else has any other questions, please do pop them in the chat. I mean, I was just going to kind of come back quickly on that one in terms of, I think local authorities are much more able to do things if there's a national narrative around things. And there's clearly a lot of move in terms of pushing forward to net zero. And there's an aspiration to, you know, move towards healthier air, and the World Health Organization has only kind of added to that, the new guidelines and targets of it has only added to that, along with increasing awareness. So I think, yeah, having strict targets at a national level, but for both climate and air pollution, and an understanding and a narrative that's going out to local authorities of the need to integrate action on these, or at least be aware of what the impacts are going to be before you do that, even if you're not ready to go to a full integration. I think is going to be critical. So that's what I'd like to see. In terms of how you get government departments to work together, Derek, I'm not sure I've figured that one out yet, but do let me know if you do. I would, as it's now 3 o'clock, I'm just going to kind of bring this to a close. I'd like to finish by saying thank you to everybody who kind of contributed to this. And I hope that this is something that you go away and have a look at in a little bit more detail. We weren't able to kind of really talk you through it, but there's so much good stuff in there, in terms of kind of support that's available, examples that are available, kind of support and signpost to more information on that. Please do go and have a look at it, whether you're passionate about wood burning or stopping wood burning, or kind of generators or active travel. Go and have a look. There's so much in there. Do let us know what you think, and do get in contact if you think there's a newsletter that you're involved with that could go out to a forum or anything like that. Would really like this to be kind of well picked up and used, and practical, you know, assistance, supporting kind of more effective action. So do please get in touch with us. Ellie's probably your best first port of call with that. And like I say, we'll be holding a feedback event in a year, 12 months time, that's the plan anyway, to look at kind of how this has been used. But we're really interested right now, kind of we'll collect responses right now so that we can see how to make this as effective as it is and how to share it so it's the most effective it is.